So I recently had an opportunity to review and audit the financial books of the Washington Education Association PAC at their offices in Federal Way. So this is kind of how it went, and I'm hoping that what I did can teach you how to kind of do the same thing. So to understand this, you have to know that under Washington State's campaign finance laws, during every election, there's actually a very limited window of time, about 10 days, where you have the opportunity to review the internal financial books of a politician or a political action committee that's active during that particular election cycle. The specific law that allows this can be actually found here at RCW 4217A235, subsection 6, and WAC 390-16043. And I'll link to both the statute and the rule down below, which basically kind of gives you a bit more information if you want to read about it, in case you're actually interested in doing this yourself. So you'll have to wait until next August during the 2024 election primary or next November during the general election. But these little kind of temporary windows of transparency can actually be very helpful if you're prepared to take the time and to make them work. Now, I've done a few of these in the past, mainly back in 2018 and 2020, but it had actually been a few years since I did one of these audits on any PAC's books, so I was actually kind of worried I was getting rusty, and I decided to brush up on my skills and hopefully then help train a few more volunteers out there so that they can actually do this for themselves next time. Maybe that's you. I also had recently heard a few stories where kind of other activists around the state did this type of review, but it didn't sound like that they were prepared or aware of how to be efficient in that process. Now, I chose the Washington Education Association PAC because it's actually one of the largest PACs in the state, and frankly, they're always in trouble. So, in fact, a few years ago, I actually settled a small $16,000 citizen action notice case against this PAC for extensive late reporting and just other law-breaking actions that were taken by them at the time. Now, more recently, I have actually filed multiple complaints earlier this year against them, and there are currently 2 different formal investigations of this large, very well-funded PAC by the Public Disclosure Commission. So I've linked to both of those down below if you're interested in just kind of some of the details. However, the point of this background is just that the more I looked at this group, the more I catch them breaking the law, so I kind of figured it would probably be worthwhile just to get there and just look a little bit closer. So, okay, now here's the logistics of this process, and I really need to explain this for you so that it kind of sets the stage for what it's like and how you have to be prepared if you want to do this yourself. Now, anyone out there can actually demand access to a PAC or a candidate's campaign books, but you have to give notice, at least 2 days, and you have to find kind of a mutual place to physically review the books. In this case, I helpfully suggested either their law firm's office in Seattle or at their headquarters in Federal Way. In this case, I kind of suggested the law firm because it's actually the same law firm that represents a lot of the bigger organizations in the state, and they've had me use their Seattle offices a few years ago when I did a book review on the Washington State Democrats. Since the WEA-PAC is a well-funded kind of multi-million-dollar operation with large piles of cash, they actually own their own building, which sits mostly empty in Federal Way off the 320th Street exit, kind of near the SeaTac Mall for you locals out there. And that's kind of a logical place to meet, and they chose that location in Federal Way this time around. You can see the photos of us here in their parking lot last week with the WA's priority, BLM, and trans flags flapping away in the parking lot. Now, if you're likely to be doing this on a smaller political campaign or PAC, you'll probably need to find a public setting of some kind of like a library, meeting room, or even a coffee shop. I've done a few before in coffee shops and even at people's private homes. However, I do recommend that you bring at least one other person with you to assist, and that you're really required to let them know, the people who you're going to look at their books, you're required to let them know who that person is in advance. You also have to be prepared to show your ID when you start the review, and this is very explicit in the statute. Now, in my case, I brought 3 other activists with me who I thought would be interested in learning more about this type of audit review and how it works. So I stopped by the Freedom Foundation Olympia, which is where I worked so many years ago. And they have a lot of eager, good-natured, and kind of aggressive younger activists there who know how to write, and they're actually willing to learn more. Now, I say I know exactly how to write because the PAC or the candidate, they're not required to allow you to take photos or to scan the documents. They're only obligated to just make this information available to you. And if they produce the legally required documents, then you have to take notes and actually copy down by hand the information that you're reviewing. This can be tough for somebody who comes unprepared, so I kind of recommend you bring college notebooks, kind of like these here, and I've got one right here. These are the ones that I brought, and if you look at this photo right here, this is an example of the type of notes that we took last week. It may seem tedious, and it actually is, but this is how it works, so you come prepared to deal with it. Now, you also will be supervised the entire time, usually by an unhappy or grumpy attorney or treasurer. In our case, this time we only had one attorney watching over us, and she was less grumpy than many that I've experienced in the past. Now, sometimes I've actually had whole rooms of lawyers and leftists glaring at me across the table. And other times I've actually had campaigns who didn't want to take the time to sit there for hours, and they just gave me copies of the documents so they didn't have to waste their time. I really don't mind, and I'll adapt to their specific approach unless they're ignoring the law. However, most of the time in my experience, they'll kind of do it the way that I just experienced last week, which is basically just large piles of documents. And you have to know how you're going to be, what you're really looking for, and then, of course, how to triage the documents. Now, in this case, we separated enough piles of receipts, canceled checks, bank statements, contracts, and other interesting documentation that we could later cross-reference with the already filed C4 reports from this PAC. Now, even with all four of us writing and the entire time that we were there, we were barely able to get through the highest priority documents that we were reviewing. We're not able to actually get through all the other piles of documents, although I did skim through them because there were thousands of pages, just to make sure that I didn't miss something critical and to make sure they actually complied. If I had to do this one all over again next time, I'd probably bring about 6 people, which would have been about right, but you'll rarely find a PAC that large when you do it yourself. Now, most of the information that you're copying down is actually very mundane, and with a well-funded PAC like this one, I really wouldn't expect kind of super obvious, very sloppy stuff, but I did catch a number of violations, which I'll discuss after I file the next PDC complaint against this very large PAC, and I'll explain how I spotted the violations. Now, most of these additional violations I would not have been able to discover in any other practical way, so this is a worthwhile way to spend your time. And keep in mind, in this specific case, I've already filed 3 distinct complaints against them over the past few months. And as I stated earlier, they're currently under investigation by the PDC for their violations. So this next complaint will most likely be rolled kind of into the ongoing investigation with new and expanding evidence of wrongdoing. The only downside to this process is that you have a very limited window of time in which to organize and then schedule book reviews like this. So I expect that during a normal election cycle, I can only do maybe 4 to 6 of these in any type of kind of practical sense. You'll also need to coordinate with others who can help you when you're taking notes, and it isn't the most exciting way to spend a few hours, so the number of people willing to help you will be limited. I'm kind of fortunate to have a large network of activists who I trust to be professional, accurate, and reliable, but you may want to plan in advance and then kind of have your short list of people who are willing to help you. Now, this is just a small example of one way that you can show up and make a difference. If you don't show up, you'll never know, and well, you won't always find what you're looking for. In my experience, it's rare that you don't find something helpful and even worth referencing. So I hope this video is helpful and inspiring to those who want examples of practical activism, and I hope I've inspired a few of you to do this next year during the primary and more general elections. I mean, more transparency, in my opinion, is always good. And I've mentioned before that I'm happy to put on training sessions around the state to make sure that more people are trained and aware of how to be more effective activists where you live. How to use the Public Records Act, how to use the PDC website for research, and how to recruit whistleblowers, and a variety of other topics that I believe freedom and liberty-oriented activists would actually find helpful. If you're interested, please reach out to me on my website at We the Governed, and then contact me. I'm here to help and always happy to help more people around our state and our country learn kind of new skills and make a bigger impact than they already are doing right now. And as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up. And this video today illustrates just another example of how you can show up. One of many examples, and just one way, just one example of kind of a small way that you can show up and be part of that future as well.